Hey everyone, this is Bathymetrics, and today I'm going to be talking about how Bitwig handles the exporting of Midi clips versus how Ableton does it. And like all the videos in this series, I'm specifically talking to experienced Ableton users, and you're used to doing things a certain way in Ableton, and then you try out Bitwig or you migrate to Bitwig, and you get a little confused because Bitwig is very similar to Ableton, but there's enough differences that you get thrown off sometimes, and what works in Ableton doesn't work the same way in Bitwig. So MIDI clip exports is one of those things. MIDI clips can be really freaking confusing at first in Bitwig. You have a lot more capability, there's a lot more friendly workflow, but it's different enough from Ableton that you're going to get confused at points. So hopefully this video will help clear up that confusion, and this video won't take that long because it's a pretty simple subject. Okay, so first things first, let's review how Ableton likes to export MIDI. I have a track here, and I did this because I just wanted to deconstruct a little drum riff from a song by Rez just to see what she did there. Just learning a little bit from the greats. So I have a Rez track here in Ableton, and I've split it at bar 5. I've lined up the beats. Of course, it's all at the correct tempo. If we come in here and look at like this kick drum and all the beats, they're hitting on grid. So everything's lined up and ready to like bust out to a MIDI clip. So I'll just kill two birds with one stone. I'm also going to talk a little bit about why I have a love-hate relationship with Ableton's convert drums to MIDI, and just in general their convert to MIDI. In theory, this stuff sounds great. In practice, it's often terrible, like really terrible. And this is a really good example. Look at this drum section right here. It's just very light. I can't play it because I'll run into YouTube issues. So I can't actually play this for you, but if you're familiar with The Witching Hour by Rez, it's a great song. And you can just see, just from looking at the audio, it's a very simple clip. There are some, it's mostly 16th notes on the 16th note grid. There's a few places where we have some 30-second notes happening, like, let's get the grid set up right here. To 16. Okay, so you can see like right here and right here, there's 30-second notes, 30-second notes here, 30-second notes here, and so on. So it's pretty simple. Most of these are on a 16th note grid, and then there's a bunch of little 30-second note hits in it, right? Very simple pattern. So in Ableton, let's go ahead and do the usual convert drums to new MIDI track and see what happens. And it's just going to export this one 4-bar clip. Okay, so let's zoom out a little bit. There's our 4-bar clip. Let's blow it up and take a look at it. Okay, and you can see right off the bat, it's missing things. Those two hits look okay for the kick and the snare, but over here, this kick's missing entirely. The whole front of the thing is cut off. Here we've got a kick, snare, kick hit, but it's only showing 2 of those hits and not the 3rd kick. It missed this kick entirely. There's nothing here at all. It missed this kick entirely. And then there's even more problems when you get up into what the hats or shakers or whatever, these high-pitched potatoes type sounds. That's an Ill Gates term. You know, the basic rhythmic element that's happening on 16th and 32nd notes is just all glommed together, and it looks a little nasty. Like you can see right here that it isn't picking up this 32nd note hit. It just sees it as one 16th note hit, starting with this one. So there's problems with Ableton, and we'll see how bad it is when we actually load this clip into Bitwig here in just a second. But anyway, with the Ableton workflow, anytime you have any kind of MIDI clip like this one, you have 2 options. You can right-click on the clip and do, where the heck are you? There you go, export to MIDI clip. Or you can do it from the file menu, and there's an export to MIDI clip here. Now, before I actually export this clip, let's show you something else that's kind of useful to understand. I'm going to take this clip and just dupe it out onto another track. And I'm going to also dupe it out this way. And I just want to point out, and then I'm going to, I don't know, split this one, get rid of this one. Okay, so there's no way in Ableton to grab a span of time and export all of this span of time as one MIDI clip that's sort of, consolidated. If I right click here, there's no option to export MIDI clip. And if I go to the file menu, export MIDI clip is grayed out. Now, you can get around that by highlighting this section of time and consolidating it. So now it's one clip, and now I can export it, and it'll look right. But it's an extra step where you have to do this kind of consolidation. And there's definitely no option or ability in Ableton that I've found ever, ever since using it since version 6. There's no way I've ever figured out to like take 2 or 3 tracks or an entire project's worth of MIDI clips and somehow export all of them in one go as a set of stems, kind of like you can export audio stems from Ableton. It's just in Ableton, any kind of MIDI export is one specific clip at a time. So we're going to ignore this for now and just keep that in mind, because Bitwig gives you the ability to like export MIDI clips like a whole project's full of MIDI stems at one time. It's really cool, and I'll show you that in a sec. So, we're going to right click this, do export MIDI clip. Let's just go save it. My downloads folder is fine. And now we're done with Ableton. Let's go over to Bitwig, and I have the same reference track in here. I've already done some deconstruction and figured out how the MIDI here looks for the drum patterns. But let's bring in that Ableton clip real quick and take a look at it. So this is what convert drums to MIDI came up with. And if we blow this up, let's zoom in a little here too. Okay. So again, here's that segment of hits. Crank this up just a little bit so you can see it better. Get all these one blip bigger. So here's what Ableton came up with. Here's what I manually came up with. And if we look at this clip, let's zoom it all in so we're seeing all 4 bars of it here. And then I'm going to use Bitwig's really cool feature for layered editing, where I can superimpose an audio track behind it. So here's the actual audio track from the reference track. And now I can do fun things like zooming in, and we can take a really close look at all this. So here's the big kick at the beginning. It didn't catch it all. The timing of some of these hits is a little weird because, yeah, you could say that this particular hi-hat needs to start with this little thing there, but most of the time, no, you want your hi-hats hitting where the big transient is. You want that transient to be like the start of your MIDI thing. And so like, the start of this one's off, this one's good, this one's good. This kick here is starting way before the beat grid, and it's not even matched up with the kick itself. I mean, here's where the kick transient starts, and here's where Ableton thought the start of the MIDI note should be. I mean, it's way off, right? And we're going to hear it miss this 30-second note entirely. There's nothing here. This snare hit, it got wrong, or kick hit, or whatever that is. This one's close. This one's off by quite a bit. And I mean, I could just go on and walk through here. It's just timing is off, way off. And the grid was perfect. Everything, the wave was lined up to the grid up in Ableton. It's just the convert drums to MIDI is terrible. It didn't recognize this 30-second note hit, and so on. So there's just a lot of inaccuracies when Ableton does it. Every time I've tried using Ableton to convert something to MIDI, it always requires a ton ton of cleanup. And honestly, drives me crazy. Sometimes it's just faster to just build it by hand, build it by ear. And in Bitwig's case, you can build it by eye, because if I go click the track that I manually did, and let's turn you off and turn you on, go away. So here's my clip against the original res clip. Let's zoom out a little bit. Get over here to the start. Zoom in a bit. So, and I need to scroll things down so you can see all my hits. So there's really there's two different kicks. This is a kick. This sound here is one kind of high-pitched kick. This is a lower-pitched kick. And this thing here is just the snare that's going through. And then the hi-hats, there were two types. There was and they're not really hi-hats. I mean, res uses interesting percussive elements, but I'll just call them hi-hats for the purpose of this video. There were two different tones. This isn't strictly a velocity difference. They're literally different sounds. So I used two different sounds in my Midi kit to emulate this. So where you see these two things, it's really just the hi-hat pattern. So let's zoom out a little bit. And so you can see it was just very easy with Bitwig's thing to just come in here and just pop my Midi notes right on the grid, get all the 30-second notes right, just decide whether it should be a, one type of hat sound versus the other type of hat sound, figure out for my kicks and snares when the lower pitched kick was hitting, when the higher pitched kick was hitting, when the snare was hitting. And it just, it took me about, I'm guessing 5 minutes to work through this section and work it out. So I can't play the res track for you, but this is what it sounds like with a quick and dirty drum kit in it. And just so you know, the drum kit I'm using, I've really fallen in love with this tool called Atlas. If you haven't heard of Atlas by Argonaut, I can't recommend enough that you go check it out, because it's pretty amazing. It's my default drum kit now for early on when I'm doing super looping and arrangement. And it's only when I get down to detailing and I'm flattening things to audio that I'll start thinking really carefully about the quick and dirty drums I whipped up in Atlas. And maybe I'll export these and use these as they are, or maybe I'll just set up a different kind of drum track with drum machines and 128s or specific samples and do a lot of heavy processing and stuff. But this is a pretty cool VST, because it just makes making drum kits really simple. Let's hear this pattern with this one Atlas kit running in it. Okay, so you probably recognize that if you're familiar with that song from Res. And it's pretty right on. Just a quick and dirty. Let me make sure I save this first. Okay. Atlas is cool because you can instantly slam new drum samples in with this new kit button, and it's just replacing all the samples from this given map. So change it again. Let's just turn loop on and just jam through some different kits. Right? And when you find a particular sound you like, you can lock it in so that this button won't change it. Or if most of the things are good and there's just one sound you want to focus on, you can just click this little refresh button here and change. Let's see, let's change this clap. Yeah. Right, so it's very quick and easy to just dial in a quick and dirty drum kit while you're composing and you're just trying to get a feel for a good drum line at the beginning of working on a song. And then what's also cool is it has this concept of maps where you can pick a specific set of folders. Like these are a bunch of Native Instruments expansions folders, and these are all these are all expansions that I would say kind of fall in the general area of like electro, glitch, complextro type drum sounds and other types of sounds. And so you can build these custom maps, and at any point you can pick a different map. Like, let's just go pick a future bass and trap kind of map I have. So now this is a whole new set of samples. And if I pick new kit now, it's pulling from this new map, but it's still locked this old kick. I had this kick locked from a different map, so it didn't change that. So you can literally like categorize and map all of your samples, your drum samples, especially anything drummy or percussive. And you can just literally quickly create custom kits by just saying, give me some random stuff, give me some random stuff. You can lock things in as you start liking certain sounds. And okay, very cool thing. So I didn't mean to go off on an ad for Atlas, but since I'm here, why not? It's a great tool. You should check it out. So anyway, the thing we want to really talk about now is just focusing on how Bitwig handles exporting MIDI clips, because it's very unintuitive if you're used to Ableton. So remember, in Ableton, you just made a clip, you right-clicked on it, and there would be an option here somewhere to do like export to MIDI. Well, in Bitwig, there's no such thing. It works quite a bit differently. So the first confusion you're going to run into is you're going to come in here and you're going to right-click a clip and you're going to go, where the hell's my export to MIDI? And then you're going to poke around. You're going to say, well, maybe it's not in the right-click menu. Maybe it's hiding up under one of these menus, because Bitwig's weird like that. Some things are only available up in these like clip menus, but not when you right-click on the clip itself. So it's just a little vagary of Bitwig, and it's really not a big deal. You get used to that really quick. But the point is, there's no export clip of any sort anywhere, except right here there's a file export to MIDI, just like in Ableton. So you think, well, great, let me go ahead and export this to MIDI. So I've got this one clip selected. I want to export it to MIDI, and it says, okay, great, where do you want to put it? Let's go up a little bit. Let's just stick them in here. So I do save. Let's call this test export MIDI. All right, we'll save it. And now we have that folder. Let's go find it. Okay, right here. So let's drag that MIDI in and see what it looks like. Hey, wait a minute. That doesn't look right. Look, it's all the clips. It's all of these clips. It's like the whole track's worth of clips consolidated into a single clip. And that's often not what you want, although that's pretty cool when you're trying to do something like pass your stems over to a collaborator and they're saying, hey, can I look at your MIDI? And you say, sure. Well, in Ableton, if I had a whole, 25, 50 MIDI clips in a project, I'd have to like export them one at a time, make sure they were labeled really well, hand them over, explain what they were. It'd be hard for the person on the other side to deconstruct them if they used a different DAW. But in Bitwig, when I pick any clip on a track, like you saw me do here, and I do File, Export, it basically exported the entire track, and it gave the clip, when you pull that MIDI back in from somewhere, even though, remember, I named it very specifically Test Export MIDI, but inside the MIDI clip, there's metadata saying this thing is from a track called Atlas. So that's kind of cool. And it is all of this MIDI combined and consolidated in one clip. Now, let's go a little further. And so far you're saying, yeah, but that isn't what I want. Well, it isn't, but I want to show you how Bitwig does this sort of stem-based exporting first, and then we'll talk about how to actually get these individual clips into their own separate tiny MIDI pieces, because that's the confusing part. So let's delete this track again entirely, and let's do a little bit of mixing things up. All right, so I've got 4 different tracks with MIDI on them now, one audio track. I'm going to select this one here, and I do File, Export to MIDI. And what do you think is going to happen? Okay, intuitively, this is where I always got confused. Intuitively, I would think, well, I understand that it tries to export the whole track and consolidate it. So I expect that I'm going to get one chunk of MIDI that is this track, about this long. And the only place MIDI shows up in is going to be right here on this portion of the clip. So let's try it and see what happens. That's what I expect. Is that what's going to happen? And the answer is Instead, something really cool happens, but again, confusing depending on what you're trying to accomplish. So remember, I've just selected this one clip. I'm going to do File, Export MIDI. Call this New Test. Oh, why do you keep trying to put it there? Save. Okay, so now here's the MIDI I just exported. Let's drag it in and see what it looks like. All right, this time, what's going on here? What is with this clip? Why is it looking like that? Okay, so if we look at this really closely, it's not this clip. It's the one and only clip in the project. It's still this whole section up here, right? It's the one and only clip that's actually playing, that's actually got a solo mark on it. So the point I'm trying to make is regardless of which clip you have selected, Bitwig is trying to be smart and saying you want to export stems, right? Because these two export options are like for getting stems out of your project. And I've done a whole other video on exporting the audio stems, but this is a stem type of MIDI. And it's basically saying what's all the MIDI in your project? What MIDI is actually active? What's playing through the master, kind of, right? So since this one is soloed, all of these are still being consolidated into one clip, and that's that. So now, with that in mind, let's go back and try a different thing. We're going to unsolo that. So now all the tracks are active, and technically all of this MIDI should be going through the master and should be playing. So if I pick any one of these now, like we'll pick this one, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if you've picked any or not, honestly. File, Export MIDI, call this yet another test. Okay. And here's our MIDI, yet another test. I want to drag this one in. Now something very different happens. What the hell is that? What the hell is that? Well, what it is a group with all my MIDI stems in it. Okay? It's got this whole track consolidated into one thing. It's named it, the original name of the track from your project. This second row is this instrument 5 consolidated and named with the name of the track, instrument 5. And then this one here is instrument 6 consolidated and named the same name as the track. And they come in as a group. So again, these MIDI files it looks like any other MIDI file, but this is like a multiple channel or multiple track MIDI file. And you'll never know it until you drag it into a project and you see this kind of thing. Honestly, I don't even know how Ableton will handle that. Let's try it. I'm curious. I didn't test this beforehand, so I don't know what to say. So we're going to drag this one into Ableton. And yeah, it looks like it wants to recognize them all as multiple MIDI tracks. So yay, good on Ableton. And it's the same deal here. Okay, so three different things you have to keep in mind when you're trying to export MIDI as stems, okay, as entire stems. The first thing to keep in mind is that it doesn't matter if you've selected one or not. Bitwig always thinks of this export MIDI window as saying, give me all the MIDI in the project that's active, that's playing through the master. If it's muted, or if only one track is soloed, or if these two are muted, or rather these three, then the only thing that's going to get exported is this track's worth of MIDI, right? So that's one way to control what you export if you only want, say, one specific track at a time, and you don't want this big package of all the MIDI tracks in one chunk, right? Is you might want to come through here and manually mute everything except the one track you want to export as a consolidated chunk of MIDI, right? Or just be aware that if you've got a solo on somewhere, that's the only thing that's going to be exported. That's another way to do it. So if I soloed both of these, I would get this clip on this track, and I would get these two clips on this track as consolidated clips, right? So you can use solo and mute to control which of your tracks actually get exported when you export as MIDI. And you know, there's just no way to tell if you've got a consolidated chunk of MIDI or not when you drag it in. But when you drag it in at first, it's going to look like this, and you're going to go, that doesn't look like MIDI. And you just have to remember that this is how Bitwig by default represents a group and all of the content inside of that group. There's 3 lines here of the same color to represent these individual MIDI clips in here. And if I change these colors, you'll see that the group thing changes accordingly to just kind of show where things start and end. Okay, so enough of the stem-based stuff. Now let's talk about how to get individual clips out, because that's probably the first thing many of us are going to try to do. So let's say you want this particular clip. This is a different pattern than this one, than this one, than this one. These are all different patterns. So I want to get these out as individual clips. Here's the only way to do it in Bitwig, literally the only way. You create a new project, File, New. You don't have to bother activating the audio engine. Remember, Bitwig has the ability to create multiple projects at the same time. It's just that only one of them can have the audio engine active. So you create that new project. Don't worry about activating the audio engine. Go back to your original project. Grab the clip you want to pull out, like this one. Click and drag up to the tab of the new project, and then come back down in here and drop it wherever you want. Okay, new track, doesn't matter. So now we have this MIDI clip here. It's a 4-bar MIDI clip. It's only that one MIDI clip. It's the only MIDI clip in this entire project. Doesn't matter what the recording state is or not, doesn't matter. So since I have only one MIDI clip in this entire project, when I do File, Export, and I call this okay, and I save it, and now I go look for that folder. Where are you? Here. Okay, here's Res Techie. So there's the clip. If I drag it in, you're going to see that it's just the one clip, which is exactly what we want. You'll also see that by default, it grabs the name of the original track. So if keeping the name is important to you, it's probably a good idea before you export. So we're going to get rid of that. We're going to come over here. Depending on where you've kept the name of the clips, you know, I can copy it out of the clip itself and then go here to the track and just paste the same name in there. All right, it's one way to do it, but keep in mind if naming your MIDI clips is important when they come back into a project, if you want it to have this same text, then make sure your track has the correct name you want. You know, or you could modify it. You know, like I could say this is a drum MIDI at 90 BPM, and it's witching hour techie or techie beat, right? So let's export now. File, export MIDI. Sorry, Rez, I don't know what you call this section. I just call it a techie beat. So now, If I drag this new one in, we can see that now when it comes back in, the clip has the name of the track that I originally exported from, not the name of the clip I originally exported from. So that'll get you a few times until it just becomes muscle memory to be a little bit careful about your naming conventions and making sure you've named things before you export. Okay, so that's how you get one clip at a time. Now, I want to get the other clips out of that project. So let's delete this. Let's delete this. And I come back to this project by clicking up here. Now we're going to pick this pattern here. So again, I click, drag, hold my mouse button down, drop it on the tab for the new project, come in here, and I'll just create a new track to keep things simple. Come over here, do Control A, Control C to grab that name, come over here, Alt, Control V, Enter. Okay, so now I've got my name the way I want it. Doesn't matter that this track's empty or all these other tracks are empty because there's only one MIDI clip in this entire project. This is the MIDI clip I want to save, or export rather. So it's the only one in here. It doesn't matter if it's anything selected, like let me pick a different track, nothing selected. If I do File, Export, and I call this so pattern A, save it, come back here and drag it in, and there we go. So this is how you do it. This is how you get one clip at a time. So to review, close this down. You're in your original project. You want to grab a clip like this one. Let's make it this one. That's a more interesting clip. I want to save this as a MIDI clip for whatever reason, all on its own. Put it in my library, whatever. For example, I don't keep MIDI clips in my Bitwig user library. This folder here in the clip panel is my Bitwig user library, and these are specifically the clips in my user library. I rarely use this except when I'm moving things around temporarily or sticking something off to the side to hold on to it. And it's usually like bounces and groups and things like that. I actually keep my MIDI clips kind of in a combination of my sample library. Like there's a lot of construction kits that will have MIDI clips inside them, and I don't try to move them out. I just know that my sample library itself has some MIDI clips, especially for construction kit folders and preset packs that I buy. But I also keep a separate MIDI lib folder that's just my MIDI, and it's all tons of different, MIDI packs that I came across one way or another. They came with presets I bought, and so I keep my own MIDI for the stuff I create, and I like to be able to take all my MIDI because it's different types. It's drums, it's arps, it's chords, it's all kinds of things. So I categorize the same way I would categorize a sample library. And for example, here's a bunch of MIDI things that I've exported out of Avenger drum patterns from VPS Avenger. So I like to have them in a folder, and I like to understand things by, a fairly complex folder hierarchy. So I would never collect or just go to a clip like this. Like you can in Bitwig right click on this and say save clip to library. And if I do this, and I save this clip, it's nice. It knows the BPM. It puts that in as metadata. It lets me add tags. It lets me name it nicely. If I've got a certain like drum machine or synthesizer on that track, it says, do you want to save that with the clip? Just like Ableton, just like with an ALC file in Ableton. Or you can uncheck this and then now just save only the MIDI as a clip. But if I do this and I save it, sure, it shows up in my library, and there it is right here. But I don't want them in my library because I have hundreds and hundreds of MIDI clips. And if you just have a library, if you go to your clip section of Bitwig and you go to library and you don't categorize these into like manual collections of some sort or use tags to create smart collections, it's just going to turn into a big mess really, really fast. You're just going to have hundreds of clips to wade through that don't tell you anything more than the clip name itself. So it's just my way of saying I think it's better to not do the obvious thing, which is right click on a clip and say save this clip to a library, because you're just eventually going to end up with a crap ton of MIDI clips that you don't know what they are, unless you give them really long explicit names, and that's just not very useful in the long run. So don't do this. Don't save clips by right clicking on them and saying save clip to library. Instead, take the time to just create a new project. Opens really fast depending on how much crap you're stuffing into your template. And then take the clip, drag it up, drop it on the name of the new project, drag it back down into a new track. Make sure you like your track name one way or another, right? Or if you named your original clips carefully, you can just come up here and do Control A, Control C to grab that, and come down here, Control A, Control V, Enter, or you can just do Alt and click and Control V and Enter, whatever your shortcuts are. And now we have this thing ready to export. And as long as there's only one clip in this new project, then when you do File Export, you're going to get just that one clip. Okay. And then we come over here and it's just the one clip. All right, so that's all I have to show you. Once you wrap your head around it, it's easy and you have a lot more flexibility and options in Ableton. I actually really like being able to just say, here's the MIDI from all my MIDI tracks. Boom, one MIDI file that I have to put up in Dropbox. And then my collaborator partner can just literally drag that into their project and the tracks are already named, the MIDI's already in exactly the right spot. None of this trying to like manually drag out a set of 50 different MIDI clips and put them in a zip file and all that crap, right? So it's useful the way that Bitwig does it by default here with Export MIDI, but it'll just blow your mind when you first trying to figure out how to get a specific MIDI clip out as just like a chunk of MIDI you could use in some other context in some other project. All right, so thanks for hanging with me. And as always, if you appreciate the time and effort I put into these, please do me a solid and go check out my SoundCloud, on my Spotify, especially my Spotify, and give me a follow. That would be really helpful. I would appreciate that. Take it easy. Bye.